So you can go ahead and turn to 1 Samuel 26. Huh? 1 Samuel 26. I don't know if we'll be able to do it. The goal is to do 4 chapters. I don't know. We'll see. But it's kind of hard to separate 3 of them. So we'll get started in 26. A couple of them, though, are kind of short. So here we have David spares Saul again. 1 Samuel 26 will start in verse 1. And the Ziphites came unto Saul to Gibeah, saying, Doth not David hide himself in the hill of Heklah, which is before Jeshimon? Then Saul rose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having 3,000 chosen men of Israel with him to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul pitched in the hill of Heklah, which is before Jeshimon by the way. But David abode in the wilderness, and he saw that Saul came after him in the wilderness. David therefore sent out spies, and understood that Saul was come in very deed. And David arose and came to the place where Saul had pitched, and David beheld the place where Saul lay. And Abner, the son of Ner, the captain of his host, and Saul lay in the trench, and the people pitched round about him. Then answered David, and said to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Abishai the son of Zeruiah, brother of Joab, saying, Who will go down with me to Saul to the camp? And Abishai said, I will go down with thee. So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and behold, Saul lay sleeping within the trench, and his spear stuck in the ground at his bolster. But Abner and the people lay around about him. Then said Abishai to David, God hath delivered thine enemy into thine hand this day. Now therefore let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear even to the earth at once, and I will not smite him the second time. And David said to Abishai, Destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said therefore, furthermore, As the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. But I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is at his bolster and the cruse of water, and let us go. So David took the spear and the cruse of water from the Saul's bolster, and they gat them away, and no man saw it, nor knew it, neither awakened, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord was fallen upon them. And David went over to the other side and stood on top of the hill afar off, a great space being between them. And David cried to the people and to Abner, the son of Ner, saying, Answerest thou not, Abner? Then Abner answered and said, Who art thou that criest to the king? And David said to Abner, Art not thou a valiant man, and who is like to thee in Israel? Wherefore then hast thou not kept thy lord the king? For there came one of the people in to destroy the king thy lord. This thing is not good that thou hast done. As the Lord liveth, you are worthy to die, because ye have not kept your master, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is, and the cruse of water that was at his bolster. And Saul knew David's voice, and said, Is this thy voice, my son David? And David said, It is my voice, my lord, O king. And he said, Wherefore doth my lord thus pursue after his servant? For what have I done, or what evil is in mine hand? Now therefore I pray thee, let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If the Lord had stirred thee up against me, let him accept an offering. But if they be the children of men, cursed be they before the Lord, for they have driven me out this day from abiding in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, Go, serve other gods. Now therefore, let not my blood fall to the earth before the face of the Lord, for the king of Israel has come out to seek a flea, as when one doth hunt a partridge in the mountains. Then said Saul, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do thee harm, because my soul was precious in thine eyes this day. Behold, I have played the fool, and have erred exceedingly. And David answered and said, Behold, the king's spear, and let one of the young men come over and fetch it. The Lord render to every man his righteousness and his faithfulness, For the Lord delivered thee into my hand today, but I would not stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. And behold, as thy life was much set by this day in mine eyes, so let my life be much set in the eyes of the Lord, and let him deliver me out of all tribulation. Then Saul said to David, Blessed be thou, my son David. Thou shalt both do great things, and also shalt still prevail. So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. You can roll to the next slide. I know it's a lot of reading, but it's kind of hard to break this chapter up because it's just kind of flows, if you know what I mean. So we have this situation. Remember, David has previously spared Saul back in chapter 24. And then in chapter 25, what we talked about last week, we spent quite a bit of time talking about Nabal and how David was ready to kill Nabal. And he learned an important lesson about being gracious, essentially. And he did not go and fight Nabal, who admittedly had acted foolishly towards David. And now here we are encountering David again. And the Ziphites are going and tattling on David again. They were the ones who went to Saul last time, and they said, hey, David is in our land. We'll go find him. We'll get him out of there. We'll give you all the details so that you can get him. And Saul was like, great, go get him. Tell me exactly where he likes to hide. Tell me where he goes. Tell me everything, and I am going to kill him. And he goes after him, and that's whenever he goes to relieve himself in the cave, and David cuts off a corner of his garment and spares him, right? And so now we have a familiar scene. The Ziphites have come back to Saul again and said, David is in this area. You can get him. And so Saul goes after David again, after he said he wouldn't. And he goes out with 3,000 men. He doesn't go out with just a handful of individuals like he's going to go try to make nice with David. He goes out with 3,000 soldiers. He's going to find him. He's going to get him. That's his plan. And so David hears about Saul coming. He sends out spies. He gets the details of everything, and he decides, I'm going to go into the camp. And so it's nighttime, and when he's going to go or kind of sneak in there into the camp, and he asks of his men, who's going to go with me? And Abishai, his nephew, says, I'll go with you. And so he does. And the two of them sneak into the camp. They don't wake nobody up. They get over to Saul, and there at Saul's head is a spear and a thing of water. And Abishai, David's nephew, what's he say? This is it, man. God has put him in your hands. He says, let me get him. That's what he says. That's Gabe's translation. Let me get him. It'll only take one hit. I will put him to the ground. I'm going to pin him to the ground with a spear. I won't have to strike twice. Saul is asleep. He'll never know what hit him. And he'll be dead. And we can go home. And all this will be done. Now, it's hard enough that this is one of David's men. But it's also his family. It's his nephew. His sister's boy. Look at him. Come on, Unc. Let me at him. I'll kill him. Look, you don't want to get the blood on your hands. Last time we was in the cave, you said you didn't want to kill him. That's fine. I'll kill him. Just let me at him. But David maintains his composure. He says, no, man. We're not going to strike out at the Lord's anointed. Take the spear, take the water, and let's get out of here. So how tempting would that be? Think about it. This is the second time. Now, usually when situations like this happen more than once, we're like, it's got to be a sign from God. I mean, come on, he's opened this door for me 2 times. I've got to waltz right through this bad boy. Let's kill him. My family's on board. I mean, I'm already anointed. I'm the next guy. This dude's running after me and I've done nothing wrong. I'm done with it. But David just don't do that. He holds his head. And it's making it, this back and forth, so to speak, this conversation's going on with them. They've got all these other soldiers around them. You know what I mean? There's people all around in the camp. Abner, the commander of the army, is right there next to Saul. He's close by, and these guys are arguing, kind of, if you will. Arguing is not really a good word for it, but they're having this little discussion about whether or not they should kill the king. Had it been me, I'd have been tempted to look at Abishai and say, do it. Do it. But he don't do that. He responds in similar fashion as he did previously. Not going to kill the king. We're not going to do this to him. Now, David makes something. He makes a statement that's incredibly wise, I think. Excuse me. I apologize about that. And so whenever David responds, in his response to Abishai, he makes it clear, not only am I not going to do this, but his day is going to come. Verse 10, in chapter 26 says, David said, furthermore, as the Lord lives, the Lord will smite him, or his day will come to die, or he will descend into battle and perish. He's saying it is not our job. God decides when somebody dies, and I am not led to take this man's life. In fact, I'm seeing all kinds of other ways that Saul can be taken out of life. God can require it of him right now. He can go into battle and he can perish. Or maybe it just is that his day, his number is called. Remember, that's what happened with Nabal. Nabal had went against David, and David was going to kill him. Abigail intercedes. David relents from attacking Nabal and Nabal's men, and because she intercedes and she gave some provisions to David, and so he relents. And whenever Abigail relays all that information to Nabal that, hey, David was going to kill you, I took all this stuff to him, everything's okay right now, the Bible says that Nabal's heart died within him, and then 10 days later he died. So we theorize, hey, maybe he had a stroke or he had a massive heart attack or something happened within him that caused him to basically go to a bedridden, vegetative type state. And then 10 days later, he was gone. David, I think, learned a lesson in that time. You know what? God's got this. If he wants him dead right now, he can take care of that. I don't have to put out my hand. A lot of times we want to rush God's choices. A lot of times we want to, well, it's got to be. I mean, come on. And so we're like, we might as well just take care of it ourselves. Let God do what God is going to do in the time that God wants it done. If you ain't got clear direction from the Lord that something to do something, especially something that's very serious. I mean, David's not trying to decide what sandwich to eat or whether or not he's going to church. He's deciding whether or not he's going to kill the king of Israel. He's making a massive life choice. And a lot of times, we try to rush those. We do it in our wisdom. We do it in our ability. We do it in our strength. We say, well, it's got to be. David didn't. I thought that was incredibly wise. You can roll to the next slide. So he gets away to the camp, and he calls out to him. He decides he's going to go ahead and confront the army of Israel. He gets a safe distance away, if you will, and he starts calling out Abner. You didn't do your job, man. We got into the camp tonight. Look, I've got the king's spear. I've got his water bottle. He could have died, and you wouldn't have known it. You deserve to die because you have done such a poor job. And then Saul hears what has been woke up, and he hears all this. Is that my son David? It's amazing. He goes back to calling him my son like he did the last time. And he says, oh, I've messed up again. Oh, I've sinned. David, just come on back, son. Just come on back home. David says, what in the world are you doing? You're chasing after a flea. You're trying to get one single bird in the middle of all these mountains. You're wasting your time. You're wasting your effort on somebody like me. Now, he lets them know, I've got your spear, I got your water. Now, he keeps his water. That's probably pretty smart considering the area he's in. Water's going to be a hot commodity. But he puts his spear out and he says, now let one of the young men come and get it. Now, some of us would have had the idea, well, won't you just come up here, Daddy Saul, and pick up this spear? And then as soon as Daddy Saul showed up, we'd slugged him in the face. We'd give him a piece of our mind. But David lets Saul and everyone else know he is not trying to harm the king by calling for one of the other guys to come and get it. I don't want the king to put himself in any type of compromising or potentially unsafe situation. I want everybody to know I'm not trying to get him. So right there in front of 3,000 soldiers, potentially men that David had previously led, he makes it abundantly clear once more, I don't want to harm you. With a simple act of saying, send somebody to come get the spear. See, one of the things that's amazing about David is he's learning. He thinks about his choices and he's learning from his choices and he's trying to progress. That's an important lesson to learn. Especially whenever you're in a position of leadership. You're not going to get everything right all the time. But as you gain in experience and as you learn to think through situations and think on your feet, and then you have to start applying the lessons you've previously learned and apply them a little bit quicker maybe than what you would have done previously. David's able to do that. He's showing maturity in his leadership. He's showing maturity in his decision making. And I think that is quite wise. Now, Saul makes an interesting statement there. He says to David, blessed are you, my son David. You will do both great things and you will prevail. Or you're going to do well. You will succeed. And David went on his way and Saul returned to his place. So they do part ways. And David does not go back to Saul. Are there questions or comments on that chapter or interesting observations?
The kid reaches inside the cookie jar. Mom catches him. I'm sorry, Mom, I won't do it again. Mom turns her back. Kid reaches for the cookie jar. Round two. I won't do it again. That right there sort of seems a little bit like one of those. I got a bit of a gut feeling it might just try to repeat itself.
Talking about Saul, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Saul is
Basically no different than saying, like, I'm sorry, about having your fingers crossed behind your back.
I think the best way to maybe explain it is there's a difference in being sorry you got caught and truly repenting. Does that make sense? People get sorry they get caught. That's Judas. Judas Iscariot was sorry it didn't work out the way that he thought it was going to. He's sorry he got caught, so he went and hung himself, which most likely would point towards impalement rather than noose. There's a whole nother discussion.
I tell you what stood out to me. There's 3,000 men out there, surrounded him. He's a little ditch. And these two guys walked right into camp. I mean, that's. But then, do you think back to some of the things that happened in history? Germans, all the things that happened in World War II, World War I. You know, there's
I think he did too. I mean, verse 12, this was a God moment. Verse 12, it kind of tells us that a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen on them. And as you're talking about it, makes me wonder, is this possibly a situation that God allowed David to get into as one of those character moments, essentially? The reality is, whenever you follow Christ, you're going to get put in situations that are going to test your character. God will allow you into those situations where you're going to have to make a choice, right or wrong. You're going to have to put feet on your faith or not. And it would seem, and the text doesn't say it, but it would seem that maybe this was one of those moments for David. The other side of this is there's going to be times in David's life where he doesn't do so great. He's going to have character moments that are going to expose character flaws. Because as wonderful as David is, and don't get me wrong, I love David. I love the story of David. I love all this. 1st and 2nd Samuel, I can dig on this. As wonderful as he is, he's not perfect. But what that does is it leaves us wanting. It leaves us wanting for a king that is perfect, that always gets everything right. And that will be the true Son of David, who comes much later on, Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, who is perfect, who does perfect. So as wonderful as David is, even in these moments where it's like, man, I'd have got Saul. And David's like, nope. He shows patience. He shows wisdom. He shows a cool head. He shows everything that I wish I could be in so many times in my life, or wish that I would have been in my life. David evidences this in his character. But we know in his story later on, he'll make poor choices. As wonderful as he is, Jesus is better. David's being chased by Saul in the wilderness, and it's got to be eating at him and eating at his men, and it's causing difficulty and all these things. But Jesus, nailed to the cross, looking down at the men who went to Pilate and demanded his blood, looking at the people who nailed him to the cross, looking at the people who hollered from the crowd, crucify him, and he says, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. As gracious as David is, Christ is even more gracious. So whenever we study this great king, don't ever lose sight of the ultimate king, of the greatest king, and that being Jesus. Because in all the ways that we wish these guys would get it right, whether it's a moment of pride and they falter because they decide to go into battle and they really shouldn't have, or that comes later on in Chronicles. But or poor choices with regard to women, as in David's life or the life of others. Whenever we read them, we're like, man, you were so close. It makes me think about Jesus, because every time I read, because Jesus got it all right. So, but yes, it's amazing. He was able to sneak in there, get around, go right through these 3,000 men. God had put this sleep. He didn't wake anybody up. I mean, all of this transpired, and it is quite amazing to consider that they were able to get so close to him. So, definitely.
David's maturity. Here, one of the things that Paul listed in the gifts of the Spirit, long suffering,
Yeah.
patience. Instead of killing him, patient. Wait on God to move. Wait on
The hard part about the patience is it drives everybody else around you nuts. If you're sitting there like, I just don't think God wants us to do that right now. And they're going, because undoubtedly, there's like a David that's always paired with an Abishai. You know what I mean? Whether it's in marriage or whether it's on leadership teams or whether it's whatever type of coworker situation, there's a David and there's an Abishai. What I'm saying, I don't think so yet. And then there's the Abishai saying, do it, do it, do it. Come on, David. But I agree. We see the maturity, we see the long suffering, and that's wonderful. But I can't help but wonder if Abishai was like, oh my gosh, if he just eye rolled.
Another key word you could also possibly put with this, humble. I'm just a lowly person. This is the king. Why would I end up putting this blood on my hands whenever this is the Lord's anointed?
Yeah. Yep.
So he's basically lowering himself to raise the word.
Yeah, he's definitely going to be humble before the Lord, and ultimately he has that reverence towards God, which leads him to revere the throne of Israel, the king of Israel. So yeah, definite humility. All right. Anything else? Okay. We can roll to the next slide. So these are the 3 chapters. I don't know if we'll get through them or not. But we have David and Achish. Now remember, he went to Achish. Do y'all remember who Achish was? He was like a Philistine, kind of like a king over a city-state, but not necessarily. There's some guys that are going to be over him. Let me put it that way. But he's a ruler within Philistia, and David went to him previously. Right? Do y'all remember whenever he went and acted crazy before Achish? Right? He acted like a madman. He went to Gath. That's the city where Goliath was from. And so when David first went on the run, he went there thinking he could get safety and security. And these guys were like, this is the guy that killed a bunch of us. And he's like, uh-oh. And so then he starts acting like a madman, and Achish is like, get him out of my sight. David was alone at that point. Nobody with him. He didn't have a whole bunch of men following him. His fighting force has went from 400 to 600 at this point now. So he's got 600 fighting men. And David himself has married. Undoubtedly, some of these men have some families. And so it's quite possible that as we read this account, when David shows up, he's got maybe 1,000. Some commentators would speculate possibly even up to 2,000 people with him. He's got quite a group that are traveling with him. And so it's an interesting situation. So we'll pick up in verse 1 and 27. And David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape into the land of the Philistines, and Saul shall despair of me to seek me any more in any coast of Israel. So shall I escape out of his hand. And David arose, and he passed over with 600 men that were with him unto Achish, the son of Maoch, king of Gath. And David dwelt with Achish at Gath, he and his men, every man with his household. That would indicate that some of them were married, and potentially even children. Even David with his 2 wives, excuse me, Ahinoam and the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's wife, widow. And it was told Saul that David fled to Gath, and he sought no more again for him. David said unto Achish, if I have now found favor or grace in thine eyes, let them give me a place in some town in the country, that I may dwell there. For why should thy servant dwell in the royal city with thee? Then Achish gave him Ziklag that day, wherefore Ziklag pertaineth unto the kings of Judah unto this day. And the time that David dwelt in the country of the Philistines was a full year and 4 months. And David and his men went up and invaded the Jeshurites and the Gezrites and the Amalekites. For those nations were of old the inhabitants of the land, as thou goest to Shur, even to the land of Egypt. And David smote the land, and left neither man nor woman alive, and took away the sheep, and the oxen, and the asses, and the camels, and the apparel, and returned and came to Achish. And Achish said, Whither have you made a road today? Or where all you went raiding? And David said, Against the south of Judah, and against the south of the Jerahmeelites, and against the south of the Kenites. And David saved neither man nor woman alive to bring tidings to Gath, saying, Lest they should tell on us, saying, So did David, and so will be his manner all the while he dwelleth in the country of the Philistines. Basically, he made sure that nobody could go and tattle on him. And Achish believed David, saying, He hath made his people Israel utterly to abhor him. Therefore he shall be my servant forever. So David hatches a plan. Say, look, this dude Saul is not going to quit chasing me. He just keeps coming and keeps coming. He says he's done, but then he comes back. He says he's done, he's probably going to come back. And I've got to quit. I mean, he's got a lot on him. He's got these 600 men, and however many of them have households, he has all of them. He has quite a caravan of people. I mean, he's got like the town of Vonor, right? And he's walking them around, he's having to hide, and he's done. And so he decides, I'm going to go back to the land of the Philistines. Saul won't come after me there. Now, his plan worked. It got told Saul. David has went to the Philistines, and Saul quits looking for him. He's done. I'm not going to go after him no more. Which would indicate that Saul still had some kind of inkling in his heart that he wanted to get David. Because he didn't say, well, my gosh, why did he do that? I'm not going to get him. I'm not interested in that anymore. It says he give up looking for him. So he figured he'd leave him there. He's not, and he's also not going to go pick a fight. He's not going to go pick a fight with the Philistines. He's not going. He's like, look, maybe they'll, and that's quite possible. He'd already thought that previously. The Philistines could kill him, or you know what? And I don't want to cause a fight. Or maybe he just stays there forever. I don't care as long as it's out of my hair. But David goes to Achish, and when he goes into Philistia, he approaches this city, Achish, who's the ruler of Gath, and he says, look, I need a place in the country. Why should your servant, see the humility he expresses. I'm going to put that in air quotes, humility he expresses before Achish. Why should your servant stay here in the city with you? And so Achish gives him Ziklag. Now, Ziklag was already allotted to the tribe of Judah. That was a part of the land that had previously, I believe you can go back to Joshua 15 and you can see the land allotment to the tribe of Judah. And it makes a notation. That's why Ziklag, he gives him Ziklag, and it's belonged to our folks ever since. It was already theirs. And David is hanging out there with his men. That's where they're living. They're out in the country, and they're making raids. And they're making raids against people that are inhabitants of old. Basically, they are leftovers that should have been run out of the land in the days of Joshua. It had already been decreed that these individuals should come under the judgment of God. But Israel had failed to get all the people out. And God had allowed them to stay, and he said he would let them stay as a test, essentially, to his people Israel. You got to go back in Joshua and all that if you want to go study that out. So he's going and attacking these folks. He's going and taking and raiding on them. He's executing the judgment, if you will. That's how some would interpret that. And he's not leaving anybody behind to tattle. And then whenever he gives report to Achish, he's saying, oh, no, I went to so-and-so's place over here in Israel. And so Achish thinks that he's going and attacking Israel. He thinks that he's making himself basically a stench in their nose. When he says that Israel is utterly abhorring him, that's what he means. Man, this guy is like a stench in their nostrils. They're never going to want him. He's always going to be mine. And who wouldn't want David on their team? So Achish is feeling pretty good. I got David. He's taking care of my enemies for me. He's making himself worse in their eyes. This is going to go great. And he don't know what's really happening. Now let's look in chapter 29. Now the Philistines gathered together at their, all their armies to Aphek. And the Israelites pitched by a fountain, which is in Jezreel. So they're getting ready for battle. And the lords of the Philistines passed on by hundreds and by thousands. But David and his men passed on in the rearward with Achish. Then said the princes of the Philistines, what do these Hebrews here? Or why are they here? And Achish said unto the princes of the Philistines, is not this David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, which hath been with me these days or these years? And I have found no fault in him, since he fell unto me unto this day. And the princes of the Philistines were wroth with him. And the princes of the Philistines said unto him, make this fellow return, that he may go again to his place, which thou hast appointed him. And let him not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he be adversary to us. For wherewith should he reconcile himself unto his master? Should it not be with the heads of these men? Is not this David, of whom they sang one to another in dances, saying, Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000s? Then Achish called David and said unto him, surely as the Lord liveth, thou hast been upright, and thy going out and thy coming in with me in the host is good in my sight. For I have not found evil in thee since the day of thy coming unto me unto this day. Nevertheless, the Lord's favor thee not. Wherefore now return and go in peace, that thou displease not the lords of the Philistines. And David said unto Achish, but what have I done? And what hast thou found in thy servant so long as I have been with thee unto this day, that I may not fight against the enemies of my lord the king? And Achish answered and said to David, I know that thou art good in my sight, as an angel of God. Notwithstanding, the princes of the Philistines have said, he shall not go up with us to battle. Wherefore now rise up early in the morning with thy master's servants that are come with thee, and as soon as ye be up early in the morning and have light, depart. So David and his men rose early to depart in the morning to return into the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel. Now David's in a pickle. See, I want to show you what transpired in chapter 28, verse 1 as well. But it says, and it came to pass in those days, the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel. And Achish said to David, know thou surely thou shalt go out with me to battle, thou and thy men. We'll deal with 28 later. So David's been there with Achish. Achish has given him land. Achish thinks, because David's been deceiving him, that David is just a really swell guy. I've not got anything wrong with you, David. You've not done anything wrong to me. But David's been lying to him. He calls him, he says, you're like an angel of God. David has been deceiving Achish, though, this entire time. And with him being aligned with Achish, it puts an expectation on David and his men that when Achish goes to battle, David fights with him. And now Achish and the Philistines are going to fight Israel. See the pickle? He has an expectation, and he tells them in 28, verse 1, you are fighting with me. And David's like, well, you're going to see what we can do. Now, I'm going to be real honest with you. The question comes to mind, would David have fought? And I don't believe David would have fought. And these Philistines were pretty smart. The lords, the princes of the Philistines. So they're overarching guys. They see David and his men at the back of everything, and they're like, what are those guys doing here? And he's like, well, he's been with me this whole time. He's doing a great job. All right, no, you send him back. That's David. That's the guy that they sung and danced to because he killed so many of our guys. And remember, when you go back in Scripture, what happened whenever Saul went against the Philistines and God was granting victory? Some of the Hebrews who had switched sides and started fighting with the Philistines, well, they switched back and they started fighting against the Philistines in the middle of the battle, right? You remember that? They gained heart, they gained strength, they started doing what they should have done, fighting against the enemy instead of with them. And so they said, look, what in the world would be better for David to make himself good with Saul than to turn against us in the middle of this fight, kill our men, and then take that as proof to Saul. Like, look, I'm your servant. I'm not aligned with them. And so you get him out of here. Send him back to wherever you told him to go. Just send him on back. And there goes Achish, kicking the can. David, old buddy, I'm sorry, man. They just don't want you no more. You can't fight. And then David goes, oh, shucks. What have I done wrong? David's got himself into a pickle, though. How's he going to get out of this one? I'll tell you how he gets out of it. God providentially intervenes and keeps David from having to evidence himself. He protects David in this moment, is what I truly believe. They observe those fighters. They kick them out. You can roll to the next slide. So maybe going to the land of the Philistines wasn't the best idea. There's pros and cons with both. If he goes, whenever he originally goes to Achish, he gets Saul off his back. It does happen. Saul doesn't pursue him anymore. He's able to get rest for him and his men. He's not having to hide in caves. He gets a town to live in. Out in the country, out of the sight of Achish. He can do as he pleases. He's able to deal with other enemies. He gains resources because he pillages, he plunders, he gets the spoil, he brings it back. He's able to give that rest to the men in his family, but he has to practice deceit and or betrayal. It's going to be necessary for survival. Maybe it's an expression of faith. Some may try to make that argument. I've not really found that. But when you read commentators on this situation, they tend to say there's either some that say this was a really bad idea, he should have never went to the land of the Philistines, and there's some that say he should have been, it was perfectly right, he got to go, he got to execute judgment on those people that were remaining in the land that needed to be kicked out of the land and all these other things. But to me, it's not so black and white. If he stayed in the land of Israel, he's going to have to keep running. That's going to be harder. But it's possible that he may still have been able to deal with those enemies. See, David had been hiding. He'd been on the run. And what we haven't gotten to get to yet in chapter 30 is we find out that David had friends in Judah. David sends some of the spoils that he gets with a later encounter to the elders in Judah who helped him and his men while he was on the run in that country. So he did have friends. He did have help. He did have aid. But it was going to be harder on his men and their families. I do believe that staying in the land that God had told Israel to dwell in would be an ultimate expression of faith, even in the time of difficulty and hardship. We've discussed that with the book of Ruth, remember? Drought comes. What does Elimelech do? And Naomi? They left, right? They left the land. They went to Moab. But then all three men die. If David stays, his loyalty and his integrity would have been kept intact. He wouldn't have had to practice deceit. He wouldn't have been put in a position where he would have had to have kind of nuanced answers. Because imagine if they had marched out to battle and David and his men were out there, they would have had to have fled, tuck tail and run, showing themselves as cowards. Don't know how well that would have went over. They would have fight against their countrymen, which isn't necessarily a problem for David and his men, because David will have to do that same, he will have to do that later after the death of Saul. But he would have had to actively participate in a battle against the Lord's anointed, the one thing that David has promised, I'm not going to do. I'm not going to fight Saul. I'm not going to be responsible for his death. In chapter 30, which we didn't get to, when David gets back to Ziklag, him and his men, they find that Ziklag has been burned. The Amalekites have raided. They've burnt Ziklag, and they've taken everyone. Now, they didn't kill anybody, but they took all the women, all the children. They took everyone and everything. And David and his men have to run down the Amalekites, and they slaughter them. They win the battle there, and they get all their stuff back, and that's the from that spoil, that's who they send gifts to the elders in Judah. If they had stayed in Ziklag at the very least, or maybe if they had stayed in Israel, that Amalekite raid wouldn't have occurred, or it very likely would have been thwarted. So, narrative in Scripture isn't always there to say the definite black and white yes or no. It tells the story as it happened. But we need to learn some lessons from what we encounter. What's difficult is in these choices, in these chapters, what we don't really read about until chapter 30, David doesn't call for the ephod. David doesn't call for the Lord to give discernment. He's got Gad, at the very least, a prophet. He's got priest. He's got the tools of discernment that are sanctioned by God. And it doesn't say that he used them. It doesn't say he didn't either. But he made a choice to go into the land. Slow down. Seek God. Gain his guidance. Then go forward. Was David able to do some good things from his position in Aphek, or Ziklag, sorry? Sure. But was it absolutely the right thing for him to do? I don't know. I think that's something that only the Lord can answer. Maybe there's questions or comments on that. All right. Well, if not, we will pray and be dismissed for tonight. Lord willing.